Tom Walker sat at his kitchen table, the late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, casting golden stripes across the faded wood and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the still air. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after years of children growing up and moving out, after the laughter and chaos have faded into memory. Tom's hands, weathered and strong from a lifetime of work, gripped his coffee mug as he listened to the phone pressed to his ear. On the other end, his son Brad's voice was brisk, almost impatient, as he rattled off details about the upcoming family vacation to Hawaii. Tom had been looking forward to it for weeks, hoping for a rare chance to reconnect with his grandchildren, to feel the warmth of family again, to maybe, just maybe, belong. But when he asked about the cost, Brad's tone shifted, turning cold and transactional. "Flights are $1,850. Dad, if you can't pay, just stay home." The words landed like a slap, sharper than Tom expected, and felt the familiar ache of being an afterthought in his own family. He'd tried to keep his voice steady, not wanting to sound hurt, not wanting to give Brad the satisfaction of knowing how deeply the word ski ut. "That's a lot, Brad. Maybe I'll just sit this in out." There was no protest, nor reassurance, just a flat "Suit yourself," and the line went dead. Tom sat in silence, the dial tone humming in his ear, staring at the old photo of his late wife on the wall. He wondered when his'n had become so distant, so transactional, so quick to dismiss her. The man who had carried him in his shoulders and taugt him to dear biker had tried to shake it off. Off, telling himself it was just money, just a trip, but the sting lingered, burrowing deep into the quiet corner sofa's heart. As the evening crept in, Tom busied himself with chores, paying bills in line, trying to distract himself from the Olawache in his chest. That's when his phone buzzed with a fraudulent alert. He opened his banking app. His breath catching, she saw the notification, 8, 5 and 40, charged to his credit card in 4 separate considered transactions, all for airline tickets. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the details, the names on the tickets matching Brad, his wife Melissa, and their 2 kids. Tom's heart pounded, a mix of anger and disbelief flooding his veins. He hadn't authorized any of it. He knew without a doubt who had done this. The betrayal was so casual, so brazen, that for a moment Tom just sat there, staring at the screen, unable to move. The house felt colder, the silence heavier, as if the walls themselves were closing in. He thought of all the times he'd bailed Brad out, helping with a down payment, covering a car repair, slipping cash into birthday cards for the grandkids. He thought of the sacrifices he'd made, the overtime hours, the dreams deferred so his family could have more. And now this. Tom's jaw tightened as he stared at the dispute all button, his finger hovering. He remembered the way Brad had dismissed him, the way Melissa had always looked at him like he was a burden, an obligation to be managed. Something inside Tom hardened. He pressed the button, feeling a surge of resolve. The wheels of justice and silent payback had begun to turn. He sat back in his chair, the sun now a thin line on the horizon, and let out a long, slow breath. For the first time in years, Tom felt something other than regret. He felt the first flicker of dignity, of self-respect, of a man who was finally ready to stand up for himself. And as the house settled into darkness, Tom knew that this was only the beginning. The night stretched long and restless for Tom, the house echoing with the kind of silence that only comes when you know something fundamental has shifted. He sat in his recliner, the television flickering in the background, but he couldn't focus on the news or the late-night sitcom reruns. His mind kept circling back to the numbers on his phone screen, the betrayal spelled out in black and white. He replayed the conversation with Brad, the coldness in his son's voice, the way he dismissed Tom's concerns as if they were nothing more than an inconvenience. Around midnight, Tom finally picked up the phone and dialed the number on the back of his credit card. The automated prompts felt endless, but when he finally reached a real person, his voice was steady, almost detached, as he explained what had happened. "No, I didn't authorize those charges. Yes, I know who did it. It was my son." The words tasted bitter, but Tom refused to let his voice waver. The agent on the other end was polite, professional and sympathetic, promising to freeze the card and launch an investigation. Tom thanked her, hung up, and sat in the dark, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He thought about calling Brad, about demanding an explanation, but he knew how that conversation would go. Deflection, excuses, maybe even anger. Instead, Tom made a list of every account and bill that would need updating, determined not to let this shake his dignity. He spent the early hours of the morning canceling automatic payments, updating his information, and making sure there were no other surprises lurking in his finances. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, Tom felt a strange sense of relief. He had taken the first step, drawn a line in the sand, and for once he wasn't the one left scrambling to clean up someone else's mess. The next morning, Tom checked his email. There were already 80 messages from the bank confirming the dispute, and a new card would be sent. He poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, savoring the quiet, and wondered how Brad and Melissa would react when their plan unraveled. He didn't have to wait long. By noon, his phone was buzzing with calls and texts from Melissa, each one more frantic than the last. Tom let them go to voicemail, his resolve hardening with every unanswered ring. He was done being the family doormat. He spent the afternoon walking through the park, letting the cool air clear his mind, and by the time he returned home, he felt lighter, more in control. He knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was standing on solid ground. As the sun set, Tom sat on his porch watching the world go by and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had made his move, and now it was their turn to respond. The next morning, Tom's phone began to ring before he'd even finished his first cup of coffee. The screen flashed Melissa's name, her smiling face from a family barbecue, now a bitter reminder of how things had changed. He let it go to voicemail, his heart pounding as he listened to her message, the syrupy concern in her voice barely masking the panic underneath. "Tom, there's been a mix-up with the flights. Can you call me back? We need to sort this out before the kids get upset." Tom set the phone down, refusing to let her urgency become his problem. He knew this game. First the sweet talk, then the guilt, and finally the threats. He poured himself another cup of coffee, the steam curling in the morning light, and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the quiet street. The phone rang again, and again he let it go to voicemail. This time, Melissa's tone was sharper, tinged with irritation. "We need to talk about the credit card. The airline says the tickets are cancelled. Brad is really upset, Tom. Please call me back. Tom felt a flicker of satisfaction, imagining the moment they realized their plan had failed. He listened to the third message, the mask slipping entirely. You need to fix this, Tom. The kids are devastated. Brad is furious. I don't know what you're thinking, but you're making a huge mistake. Tom saved each voicemail, forwarding them to his email for safekeeping, documenting every attempt to manipulate him. He spent the rest of the morning in a strange state of calm, moving through his routine with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He made breakfast, read the paper, and even took a walk around the block, nodding to neighbors who had no idea of the storm brewing inside his family. When he returned, there were more missed calls, more messages, but Tom ignored them all. He was done being the one who always gave in, who always fixed things. I always put everyone else's needs before his own. He sat at his desk, opened a new document, and began to write down everything. Dates, times, the details of the charges, the voicemails, the texts. He wanted a record, not just for the bank or the lawyer, but for himself. He wanted to remember this moment, the moment he finally stood up for himself. As the afternoon sun warmed the kitchen, Tom felt a quiet strength settle over him. He would not call back. He would not explain himself. He would let the consequences speak for themselves. That evening, he made himself a simple dinner, sat on the porch, and watched the sun set, feeling the weight of years of resentment begin to lift. The silence from his end was its own kind of power, and for the first time in a long time, Tom felt like he was finally in control. By midday, the family group chat had become a digital battleground, the pings and buzzes of Tom's phone relentless as Brad's anger spilled out for everyone to see. "Dad, you're ruining everything," Brad wrote, his words sharp and public, as if shaming Tom in front of the extended family would force him to back down. "You embarrassed us. The kids are crying. Melissa is in tears. Why would you do this?" Tom read the messages in silence, his jaw set, refusing to be baited into a public argument. Melissa chimed in next, her tone shifting from pleading to passive-aggressive. "We just wanted to make memories as a family, Tom. I don't understand why you're being so difficult. Can't you just let this go for the kids?" Cousins and aunts began to weigh in, some siding with Brad and Melissa, others sending Tom private messages of support. "Hang in there, Uncle Tom. You don't deserve this." The chat scrolled on, accusations and guilt trips piling up. But Tom kept his composure, documenting every message, every attempt to twist the story. He realized, with a kind of cold clarity, that this was about more than a few $1,000s or a cancelled vacation. This was about respect, about years of being taken for granted, of being expected to foot the bill and keep quiet, of being treated like a burden instead of a father. He thought of all the times he'd bailed Brad out, the quiet sacrifices he'd made, the way Melissa always looked at him like he was an inconvenience. No more. Tom typed a single message into the group chat, his words measured and final. "I did not authorize those charges. The bank is handling it. I will not discuss this further." Then he muted the conversation, the silence that followed more satisfying than any argument. He spent the afternoon in his garden, pulling weeds and feeling the sun on his back, letting the earth ground him as the digital storm raged on with at him. He knew the family would talk, that some would judge him, but for the first time he didn't care. He was done explaining himself, done apologizing for setting boundaries. As dusk fell, Tom sat on his porch watching the sky turn from gold to indigo and felt a quiet pride settle in his chest. He had drawn a line, and this time he wasn't stepping back. The battle for his dignity had begun, and he was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were a blur of tension and quiet resolve, as Tom waited for the bank's fraud team to do their work. Each morning, he checked his email for updates, his heart thumping with a mix of dread and anticipation. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the act of standing up for himself had shifted the very air. He spent his time organizing paperwork, making sure every bill, every statement, every email and text was saved and printed, building a fortress of evidence around himself. The phone calls from Brad and Melissa slowed, replaced by terse emails and the occasional message from a distant cousin trying to play mediator. Tom responded to none of them. Instead, he focused on the facts, on the truth, on the quiet satisfaction of knowing he was finally doing what was right for himself. One afternoon, the bank's fraud investigator called, her voice brisk but not unkind. "Mr. Walker, we've completed our review. The tickets were purchased from an IP address registered to your son's home. The names on the tickets match your son, his wife, and your grandchildren. We have all the evidence we need to reverse the charges and flag the account for attempted fraud." Tom thanked her, relief and sorrow mingling in his chest. He never wanted things to come to this, but he knew he had done the right thing. He called his lawyer, just in case, and was advised to keep all records and correspondence. That evening, Tom sat at his desk, looking at the neat stacks of paper, the digital files, the voicemails and screenshots. He realized that for the first time, he was fighting for his own dignity, not just his money. He wrote a letter to his grandchildren, explaining in gentle terms why he wouldn't be joining them on vacation, hoping they would understand someday. He wanted them to know the truth, but not the bitterness. As the sun set, Tom felt a strange sense of peace. The evidence was undeniable, the path forward clear. He was no longer a victim, no longer the family's safety net. He was a man who had drawn a line and dared anyone to cross it. And as he turned off the lights and climbed into bed, Tom knew that the real confrontation was still to come. But this time, he was ready. The next morning, Tom sat at his kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of birds outside the only sounds in the house. He sipped his coffee, feeling the weight of the past week settle on his shoulders, but also a new sense of clarity. He opened his laptop and found an email from his lawyer, the subject line crisp and direct. Formal notice sent. The letter was attached, a carefully worded warning to Brad and Melissa, outlining the legal consequences of credit card fraud and making it clear that any further attempts to use Tom's accounts would result in criminal charges. Tom read it twice, the language both cold and final, and felt a pang of sadness for the family he'd lost, but also a surge of resolve. He forwarded the letter to his own files, then closed the laptop and stood, stretching his back and looking out the window at the quiet street. The phone rang, and this time it was Melissa, her voice trembling with desperation. "Tom, please, you don't have to do this. It was a mistake. We were stressed, the kids were begging to go, and Brad thought you'd understand. Please don't press charges. We'll pay you back, I promise." Tom listened in silence, letting her words wash over him. He could hear the fear in her voice, the realization that their actions had real consequences. For a moment he almost softened, almost let himself believe that things could go back to the way they were. But then he remembered the coldness in Brad's voice, the years of being taken for granted, the way Melissa had always looked at him like he was a burden. He took a deep breath, his voice steady and calm. "Melissa, I'm sorry, but this isn't just about the money. It's about respect. It's about boundaries. I can't let this go. Not this time." There was a long silence on the other end, then a quiet sob. "Please, Tom, think of the kids." Tom's heart ached, but he starred. "Od Ferum. I am thinking of them. I want them to learn that actions have consequences, that you can't just take from people and expect them to forgive you every time." He hung up, his hands shaking, but his resolve unbroken. He spent the rest of the day in the garden, letting the sun and the earth ground him, feeling the old pain give way to something new, a sense of dignity, of self-worth, of finally standing up for himself. That night, as he watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Tom knew he had made the right choice. He was done holding back. The next chapter of his life would be written on his own terms, no matter who tried to stop him. The days that followed were a study in silence and revelation, as Tom watched the true colors of his family and friends emerge in the wake of his decision. The family group chat, once a place for birthday wishes and holiday plans, became a battleground of passive-aggressive messages and thinly veiled accusations. Brad's anger simmered just beneath the surface, his texts clipped and formal, as if he were speaking to a stranger rather than his own father. Melissa's pleas turned to icy silence, and the grandchildren, caught in the crossfire, sent short, confused messages that broke Tom's heart. "Grandpa, are you mad at us?" one read, and Tom sat for a long time before replying, choosing his words with care. "No, sweetheart, I love you very much. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and we have to fix them." The extended family fractured along old fault lines. Some relatives called Tom, their voices low and supportive, sharing their own stories of being used or overlooked. "You did the right thing, Tom. I wish I'd had your courage," his sister confided, her words a balm to his wounded pride. Others sided with Brad and Melissa, accusing Tom of overreacting and tearing the family apart over a little money. The judgment stung, but Tom let it roll off his back, refusing to be drawn into arguments or guilt trips. He spent more time with friends who valued him, reconnecting with old neighbors and joining a local book club where his insights were welcomed and his laughter was genuine. The house, once heavy with the weight of unspoken resentment, felt lighter, the air easier to breathe. Tom started volunteering at the local library, helping kids with their reading, and found joy in the simple act of giving without expectation. He realized that his true family was not defined by blood, but by respect and kindness. The pain of losing his son's trust was real, a dull ache that flared in quiet moments, but it was nothing compared to the pain of losing his own self-respect. Tom understood now that boundaries were not walls, but doors. Doors he could choose to open or close, depending on who stood on the other side. As the days turned to weeks, Tom felt himself growing stronger, more certain of his place in the world. He was finally free from the burden of always being the one to forgive, to fix, to pay. And as he sat on his porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the trees, Tom knew that the family he had lost was nothing compared to the peace he had found. The letter from the bank arrived on a rainy Thursday, its language formal and final. "We are unable to reverse the charges without a police report." Tom read it twice, the words blurring as the weight of what came next settled on his shoulders. He knew what he had to do. That afternoon he drove to the local police station, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm as he rehearsed what he would say. The officer at the desk listened carefully, taking notes as Tom explained the situation, how his son and daughter-in-law had used his card without permission, how he'd tried to resolve it quietly, how the family had split apart in the aftermath. The officer nodded, his face sympathetic but professional, and filed the report. The next weeks were a blur of paperwork and waiting, the tension in Tom's chest growing with every passing day. Then came the summons, small claims court, a date set for the following month. Tom spent hours preparing, organizing his evidence, bank records, emails, voicemails, the investigator's report. He practiced his testimony in front of the bathroom mirror, his voice growing steadier with each repetition. The day of the hearing dawned grey and cold. Tom dressed carefully, choosing a suit his wife had always loved, and drove to the courthouse with a sense of grim determination. The courtroom was small, the air thick with anticipation. Brad and Melissa sat on the other side, their faces tight with anger and embarrassment. The judge listened as Tom laid out his case, presenting each piece of evidence with quiet precision. Brad's defense crumbled under cross-examination, his explanations growing more desperate as the truth became impossible to deny. Melissa sat in stony silence, her eyes fixed on the floor. When the judge finally ruled in Tom's favor, ordering Brad and Melissa to repay the money and flagging their credit record for fraud, the room went silent. Tom stood, thanked the judge, and walked out with his head held high. Outside, the rain had stopped, the sky clearing to reveal a sliver of blue. Tom felt a surge of relief, a sense of vindication that was less about the money and more about reclaiming his dignity. The story spread quickly through the community, and Tom became a quiet example of standing up for oneself, even when it meant standing alone. He received letters from other parents and grandparents, thanking him for his courage. Tom realized that his true legacy was not in the money he had saved, but in the example he had set. As he drove home, the sun broke through the clouds, and for the first time in a long time, Tom felt truly free. The aftermath of the courtroom verdict rippled through the community like a stone dropped in still water, the shockwaves reaching every corner of Tom's world. Brad and Melissa's reputation, once polished and envied, began to tarnish almost overnight. Friends who had once flocked to their backyard barbecues now kept their distance, conversations growing awkward and short at neighborhood gatherings. The story of the credit card scam, the court case, and Tom's quiet but unyielding stand spread through the town, not as idle gossip, but as a lesson. Tom's name came up in conversations at the grocery store, at the library, and even at the local diner, always with a note of respect. He finally stood up for himself, people said. He showed them you can't just walk all over someone, even if they're family. Tom began receiving letters and emails from other parents and grandparents, some he knew, many he didn't, thanking him for his courage and sharing their own stories of being used, dismissed, or taken for granted. Each note was a small balm, a reminder that he was not alone, and that his actions had rippled out further than he could have imagined. For Tom, the pain of losing his son's trust was real and sharp, a wound that ached in quiet moments when he saw a father and son laughing in the park, or when he passed the empty chair at the family table. But as the weeks passed, that pain was slowly replaced by something else. A sense of freedom, of lightness, of finally being at peace with himself. He spent his days hiking the wooded trails outside town, breathing in the scent of pine and earth, letting the rhythm of his footsteps quiet his mind. He read novels on his porch, savoring the silence, and found himself drawn to the company of people who valued him for his kindness, his humor, and his wisdom, not for what he could give or pay for. He joined a local book club, where his insights were welcomed, and started volunteering at the community center, helping with everything from food drives to chess lessons for kids. Tom realized that his true legacy was not in the money he had saved or the vacations he had missed, but in the example he had set. That boundaries matter, that dignity is worth fighting for, and that it is never too late to reclaim your self-respect. The world felt bigger, brighter, and more open than it had in years. Tom was finally free, not just from Brad and Melissa's expectations, but from the weight of his own regret. And as he sat on his porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the trees, Tom knew that the family he had lost was nothing compared to the peace he had found. With the refunded money finally back in his account, Tom felt a sense of possibility he hadn't known in years. He sat at his kitchen table, the morning sun warming his hands, and stared at a postcard of the Grand Canyon he'd kept tucked in a drawer for decades, a quiet dream he'd never dared to chase. Now, with no one left to answer to and nothing holding him back, Tom booked a solo trip. The flight was quiet, the landscape below shifting from city grids to endless red earth and canyons carved by time. When he arrived, Tom felt a sense of awe and freedom that made him feel young again. He hiked the rim trails at sunrise, the sky painted in gold and rose, the air crisp and full of promise. He took photos, not for social media, but for himself and for the grandchildren he still loved deeply. Each evening he wrote postcards to them, sharing stories of the canyon's vastness and the simple joy of standing on the edge of something so much bigger than himself. Remember, he wrote, respect and honesty matter more than any vacation. Take care of each other and never be afraid to stand up for what's right. The days passed in a blur of beauty and quiet reflection. Tom met other travelers, some young, some old, and found himself swapping stories around campfires, laughing at old jokes, and listening to the dreams of strangers who, like him, were searching for something more. When he returned home, Tom felt changed. The house was still and peaceful, but it no longer felt empty. He filled his days with purpose, volunteering at the local library, mentoring young people who needed a steady hand and a listening ear. He started a small garden, finding joy in the slow, patient work of nurturing new life. The community embraced him, not as a victim, but as a man of quiet strength and integrity. On warm evenings, Tom sat on his porch, a gentle smile on his face, watching the sun set over the trees. He knew he had reclaimed his dignity and written his own ending. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined him. His story of silent, strategic, and intellectual payback became a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a reminder that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and refusing to be used. Tom's legacy was not in the money he had lost or won, but in the peace he had found, and in the example he had set for everyone who would one day face the same choice: to stand up, to walk away, and to begin again. Tom's life settled into a new peaceful rhythm, one that felt both unfamiliar and deeply right. The days of waiting for Brad's calls or Melissa's approval were gone, replaced by mornings spent tending his small garden and afternoons volunteering at the local library. He found joy in the small things: watching tomatoes ripen on the vine, helping a shy child sound out a difficult word, sharing a cup of coffee with a neighbor who had become a true friend. The community embraced him, not as a man who had been wronged, but as someone who had chosen to live with dignity and kindness. Tom became a mentor to several young people, sharing his story and teaching them about boundaries, respect, and the importance of standing up for oneself. He was invited to speak at the community center, where his quiet strength and gentle humor made him a favorite among the regulars. The pain of the past lingered, surfacing in quiet moments when he saw a father and son laughing together in the park, or when he passed the empty chair at the family table, but it no longer defined him. Instead, Tom focused on the future, on the life he was building for himself, one rooted in self-respect and genuine connection. He kept in touch with his grandchildren, sending them letters and small gifts, hoping they would remember the lessons he had tried to teach. Sometimes he would sit on his porch in the evening, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and reflect on how far he had come. He realized that the greatest revenge was not in winning a court case or reclaiming lost money, but in reclaiming his life. Tom had built a new world for himself, one where he was valued for who he was, not for what he could give. The community, once a backdrop to his family's drama, had become his true home. As the sun set and the sky turned to gold, Tom felt a deep sense of peace. He had chosen happiness, and in doing so had found a family that would never take him for granted. On a warm summer evening, Tom sat on his porch, the sky painted in streaks of orange and lavender as the sun dipped behind the trees. The gentle hum of cicadas filled the air, and the scent of fresh-cut grass drifted on the breeze. Tom rocked slowly in his chair, a glass of iced tea in hand, and let his mind wander over the long, winding road that had brought him here. He thought of the pain and humiliation of Brad's betrayal, the coldness in Melissa's voice, the sting of being told to just stay home. He remembered the sleepless nights, the courtroom tension, the ache of seeing his family fracture under the weight of their own choices. But as he looked around at the life he had built, a life filled with purpose, friendship, and quiet joy, he realized that those wounds had become the foundation for something stronger. The community had become his family, their respect and affection a balm to his spirit. The children at the library greeted him with laughter and hugs, the neighbors waved as they passed, and the friends he'd made in his book club filled his days with conversation and warmth. Tom's garden flourished, a riot of color and life, each bloom a testament to his patience and care. He still missed his grandchildren, still wished things could have been different with Brad, but he no longer let that longing define him. Instead, he wrote letters, sent postcards, and hoped that one day they would understand the lesson he had tried to teach. That dignity and self-respect are worth more than any vacation, any fleeting comfort. As the stars began to appear, Tom felt a deep, abiding peace settle over him. He had faced betrayal and loss, but he had not let them break him. He had chosen to live with courage, to set boundaries, to demand respect, not with anger, but with quiet, unwavering resolve. His story had become a quiet legend in the neighborhood, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and refusing to be used. Tom smiled, content in the knowledge that his legacy would endure, not in the money he had saved or the battles he had won, but in the example he had set for everyone who would one day face the same choice: to stand up, to walk away, and to begin again. As the night deepened and the world grew still, Tom closed his eyes, grateful for the journey and ready for whatever tomorrow might bring.